Hey,
Hello there.
Bill. How are you, Bill?
I'm good. How about yourself?
I'm good, thank you. I appreciate you joining us. I'm actually going to start right now. So
Okay.
um, there we go. Now we've got a full
Wow.
screen. Wow, look who's here. So Lynn, are you muting everyone?
I can.
All right.
Actually, I am not the host.
Oh,
You,
I'm the host.
so
Kelly,
you need to
actually,
mute everyone.
Kelly, you're co-host, Kelly.
Okay.
Okay.
So,
So we are going to get started, and I want to say good afternoon, everyone. My name is Susan Karp, and I'm one of the member services directors here at COA. I'm in the room with two of my colleagues. I've got Lynn Wolf. Lynn is our communications wave. Lynn. She's also here to
Hi,
rescue me in
Lynn.
case we have a problem. And then we have Kelly Burke, who's also here, and Kelly is one of the other member services directors. So there you go. So now I'd like you to take a look around the room for what you can see. So during the pandemic, your workloads increased 100-fold as volunteers came out of the woodwork, and you just rose to the occasion. So myself, along with the entire staff of MCOA, would like to extend a heartfelt thanks and appreciation for all the hard work you do every day, and particularly in the last 3 months. We do have a really full agenda today. So we're going to get started, and we have 3 guest speakers, and we have 59 people registered. So not everyone has signed in, but it's a full crew today. So what we're going to do is we're going to have the 3 speakers be back to back, and then we're going to save time at the end for questions. So Kelly is going to monitor the chat box. So if you have a question, just type it right into the chat box, and Kelly will go ahead and take the question, and then she'll ask the speakers. And for those that are on the phone, we want to welcome you as well, but we also need to have your phone on mute. So without further ado, I would like to introduce our first guest speaker. Her name is Ruth Lindsay, and she is an RSVP coordinator on the North Shore. And what am I seeing right now on my screen? It's not Ruth. So Ruth, wherever you are, I'm going to turn the microphone over to you. Welcome, Ruth, and thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you. I hope everyone, I don't know if you can see me, but it's okay if you can't, as long as you can hear me. So
I can
thank
hear
you
you.
so
and
much.
see you.
Thank you so much for inviting me, Susan, and welcoming me to speak to this wonderful group of volunteer professionals from all over the state of Massachusetts, because I'm sure you all represent different areas and arenas. And I know every Council on Aging has such a different, different role in the community depending on the size, and it's just amazing how different everyone, just your communities are. So I appreciate everything you do, and I just want to be as brief as I can and not bore you too much, and give you as much information as possible. So my name is Ruth Lindsay, and I'm the volunteer director at Senior Care, which is an area agency on aging in Gloucester, Massachusetts. And so I'm the RSVP volunteer director, and RSVP stands for Retired and Senior Volunteer Program. And the mission of RSVP, as many of you probably know or possibly know, I'm not sure, is engaging people who are 55 and over in community service, and using their skills developed from a lifetime of experience and their background and interests to this purpose of volunteering and helping and giving back to the community while fulfilling themselves. So it's a wonderful program with a great mission. I've been with RSVP and with Senior Care for 10 years, and I started as the assistant 10 years ago, and I never thought I was going to reach the age of being actually able to be an RSVP volunteer, but this year I turned 55, so I'll be able to enroll for my own program. Quite an accomplishment. And when I first started at RSVP and at Senior Care, I did not see the value. I didn't understand what the point of RSVP was. I thought I didn't understand why senior care didn't just have a volunteer manager, and we could place volunteers to deliver meals, drive elders to their appointments, work as, volunteer as money management, volunteers and so forth. I thought that was a great program. They had some wonderful programs, but I didn't really understand what the role of RSVP was in the community because I was pretty new to volunteering and also new to the RSVP program. So I've learned a lot over the last 10 years, and what I've seen and I've really made my mission is how much everyone benefits from having a program like an RSVP in your community. And across the country, there's about 700 chapters. They're federally funded grants that are given to local sponsors, and they're 3-year grants. So it's pretty nice. You get a set amount of money that you apply for. So Senior Care has been applying for this grant since 1990, so for 30 years. And you tell, in the grant, you propose what is it that you're going to do? What's your mission? What are your outcomes? And how many volunteers are you going to place? And also what towns that you work in. So Massachusetts has, I believe, 13 or there's a lot of programs that are senior companion programs, foster grandparent programs, and RSVP programs. And I actually will send an email to Susan, if you don't mind forwarding it along, that has more details, but I don't want to bore you with too many details because then we all fall asleep or get hungry for our lunch. So in any event, this grant that we have, it's really keeps us set on our mission of placing volunteers throughout the community that we serve. And we happen to serve 13 cities and towns all over the North Shore, including Gloucester, where Senior Care is. And if you've noticed, I'm sure you have, when a volunteer comes in your door and wants to get involved, they don't only want to come to the senior center. They sometimes love to come and do an exercise class, and maybe they'll start eating the meals. They may want to serve on the triad committee or answer phones. People aren't one-dimensional. It's one thing I've really learned from this. When we meet people, maybe they want to start volunteering by doing one thing, but they really do best when they're fulfilling their own interests and then using their skills towards those interests and helping and making a difference in the community. So what I've kind of figured out about RSVP, which actually, did I say it stands for Retired and Senior Volunteer Program. Its mission really in placing those volunteers is we're almost like a job placement agency, but we're a volunteer placement agency. So we have really strong partnerships throughout the community. They're not always officially written on paper, and they're called MOUs. Sometimes they're informal partnerships, which are wonderful just as well. But we never consider ourselves competitors with placing volunteers or accepting volunteers. We've had some wonderful experiences where a volunteer will come in. We have a one-on-one interview with every person who wants to volunteer, and they may be interested in learning about delivering Meals on Wheels. They're thinking about retiring and they need something to keep them busy. So they'll do it 1 morning or 2 mornings a week, and it's a 2-hour commitment. When we meet with them, we learn about that person, which I'm sure, many of you take the time to do as well. And you learn about that background, their interests, what they did for a career, something maybe they never pursued and are interested in. And we have a form where they put that information and we put it in our database so that we can then look for opportunities to meet those interests at a later time. Sometimes we can talk about them right then, but we don't always know what's available at all times. I think only God knows that. So in any event, we really have a strong program because we're federally funded, and we are required to run the Corey check, the driver check. We have training. We have a lot of regulations that we have to go through. And then we place that volunteer within the role that they're interested in. At the same time, when we meet someone, if they're new to the community or if they're not really connected with other people, we always give them the Senior Center newsletter for the town where they live. And we talk about how they could get involved in the activities that maybe meet those or match those interests that they have. Because we really see the value in being a partner with our whole community and not just think of someone as being a volunteer that's going to fill the slot. We need Meals on Wheels drivers. We've got to fill that slot. We always think of people as being, who are you and what do you want to do and what's going to make a difference for you? And if you're not going to be a good fit for Meals on Wheels, I don't want to pursue that or push that on anyone. I want to find out and dig deeper and maybe not even place them at that moment, but have them sort of, you know, as someone that wants to volunteer. Maybe they want to work with children. Maybe they want to work with people that have a dementia, or they want to help in some other way. And you can find out, you can say, I remember talking to the COA director in Manchester, but I forget what her program exactly is. And so that's how we treat the people that we work with, the partners that we have, is we're always communicating and trying to match or meet the needs of everyone involved. And I think it really benefits it benefits our program, it benefits the volunteer, it benefits the consumers they're helping, it benefits the senior center, and then it also benefits the entire community. So, I just really, just to highlight some really great partnerships that we have. So I said we cover 13 cities and towns. We have volunteers in all 13 cities and towns, and some are tax volunteers. Some are those money management or Meals on Wheels drivers. And then there's some that just maybe work at a nonprofit helping answer phones. And at the same time, they serve on the Triad Committee at one of their local senior centers. So you can see how these connections really all come together. And I'm sure, I'm preaching to the choir. You all know about these strong connections and how important they are. But I just would really encourage you to reach out to your RSVP if you have one in your community that covers your city or town, especially now with COVID-19 and this new kind of normal that we're in. I think it's a great opportunity for us all to be more connected and to share more resources. So Senior Care started about 2 months ago, having a call once a week with all of our 9 councils on aging. So we have a phone conference, and some of the those 9 people might be on the call right now, I'm not sure. But it's been a great way for us to share resources because we still drive elders to their medical appointments through RSVP, where some councils on aging, or most, don't have that started yet. So we can make sure they realize what we have available and share those resources. They can do the same thing. They can say, we're actually bringing people their groceries. And then I know that, so that when we're driving elders who need groceries and they live in their town, we connect to each other's programs. And we're doing that all the time, and we're trying as much as possible to help with sharing resources, sharing volunteers, helping with, helping the community more and more. So with Beverly, Council on Aging. We've had a great relationship since day one, since I started. And, you know, all 13 cities and towns, I don't always know all the councils on aging, but everybody's been very friendly and helpful, but I'm not always a partner with another council on aging. Gail Murley, who's the volunteer manager in Beverly, will email me probably once every other week. And she'll send me an email something like, Ruth, I just met a wonderful couple. They're new to the senior center. I gave them a tour. Mrs. Smith wants to help with the serve on a committee. She wants to do the newsletters, but her husband really would like to be a driver. So he's either, a potential Meals on Wheels driver or medical driver. So she refers people to me on an ongoing basis because she wants to help those volunteers to be fulfilled. And then I'll do the same thing where I'll say I know that they're looking for people to help answer the phone at this senior center because they've had some turnover recently. And I don't mind that person's not going to be filling some Meals on Wheels role or whatever it is that I need, because I know that the need of the volunteer is the most important. So we really work together closely, and we're actually really excited. We're starting on a new program with the Beverly Senior Center that's sponsored through the MCOA, and it's through the Empower Success Corps Discovery program. And we're partnering with them with a really similar mission to RSVP. It's pretty much the same mission of engaging people 55 and over in community service using their lifetime of skills. And what we're going to be doing is having volunteers learn about their purpose in life. As you start to retire, you're thinking like, what is it that I want to do for the next 20 years or to make myself happy? And we're going to be sort of reaching into that area with volunteers, tapping into that, and then helping by connecting with our partners in the nonprofit world about their needs, sort of identifying those needs in the community and matching the volunteers with those needs. So more professional careers can be extended, or a new path, a new encore is found for somebody looking to maybe start working with a nonprofit as a volunteer, and it could turn into a second or third career. So we're really excited, and I'm always excited when a Council on Aging sends me an email. Rockport recently, we've been working together to get volunteer drivers, and they're putting our need in their newsletter. And it just feels so good because I feel so, I just feel like, thank goodness, we're not a competitor. We're not trying to take any volunteers. We're just trying to engage as many people in volunteer service and work with you. We want to help you get your mission accomplished. And again, I'll send an email with all of the information about the RSVPs across Massachusetts. I wish there was one for every city and town just like you. I think it's so important that there's a Council on Aging available. And I never knew about this world until 10 years ago. I didn't know what COA stood for. And now I do. And it's just such an important, vital part of every community. And, I really appreciate, I was just talking to, I think it was Ginny, my mom lives in Sagamore Beach. And I'd love for her to be a little more connected with her Council on Aging because she's 87, she lives alone, she's connected with her church, but there's so many things for her to learn about aging, about managing her money and what services are out there. And as a daughter living 2 hours away, I don't always have the time to help her with these things. And I feel like Council on Aging fill that gap. So I really appreciate you having me on, and I'm happy I'll stay on because I'm interested in hearing the rest and look forward to your questions. So thanks again, Susan, and thank you, everyone.
Great, Ruth, thank you so much. I really appreciate it. And we'll have some questions at the end. So actually, Kelly, I think you need to make Lynn the host so she can share a document. Our next speaker is Doug Dixon. Doug, give a wave in case you're not popping up on everyone's primary screen. Doug is actually, he was the co-founder of Encore Boston, and he's got a presentation that he would like to share with us, focusing on recruiting or retaining and energizing those 50+ volunteers. Doug, I'd like to say welcome. You're in the room with a lot of very talented people, so have at it. Here's the microphone to you.
Thank
Are
you,
you seeing
Susan.
the presentation? Sorry to interrupt. Just want to make sure you're seeing the presentation.
I can see it on my screen.
Okay, great.
Great. And everybody can hear me all right?
Yes.
Okay, great. Thank you. Thank you, Susan. I'm really pleased to be here. And what I'm going to do is to step back a little bit and create a framework around some of the things that Ruth was talking about. I'll refer to some of the things that she mentioned along the way. Next slide. So basically what we're going to be talking about is ways in which you can think about the process of recruiting, supporting, and retaining older volunteers in particular, although some of the things that we're going to talk about are particular to older volunteers. A lot of them are more broadly applicable. And it's not only older volunteers that you may be looking for. In fact, intergenerational connections are very much a part of what we want to be encouraging at this stage of life for older adults. But on the other hand, we also want to make certain that the people that we serve have opportunities to be engaged. And that's the primary focus for our conversation today. Next slide. So here are the things that we're gonna focus on. I mean, we could talk for hours about this, and in fact, I'm gonna share a resource that I helped to create that if we went from top to bottom on that, we would be talking about this for hours. But I'm going to talk about a little bit about about how roles are designed, how to think about creating volunteer roles. I'm also going to talk about what motivates people at this stage of life and how we can tap into that motivation. And then there's some things about how we message to people based on what we've decided to do in terms of role structure, how we reach out to people, and how we create a sense of belonging. And this is related to retention. You know, once you get them, how do you keep them? Next slide. First of all, what I want to do though is talk about what we know about people in this age group. And basically we're focusing on people 55 and older. And I know that that's a difficult category, and I know we face this question a lot in the work that we do together, because that encompasses 3 generations, and soon to begin encompassing the 4th, which is the Gen Xers, which are moving into this category. So it's hard to generalize. But the information that we have says that from anywhere from 25 to 30%, and that depends on the study that you refer to, of people in this age category, 55 and older, volunteer in some formal way. This doesn't include people who volunteer in the sense that they help out their neighbors or they're involved in caregiving. Something like 40% of people in this age group are primary caregivers for their grandchildren. Another 40% or so, 38 to 40%, are primary caregivers for aging parents or others in their family. So there are lots of ways that people give back. But what we're talking about here are the formal volunteer roles that Ruth was talking about. What's interesting is that people at this life stage volunteer a little bit less than people who are in their mid-adult years. Primarily that's because people in that age are still raising families and are very much involved in volunteering that's related to their kids. You know, sports programs, schools, and so on. So the rate of volunteering drops off a little bit as people grow older. but the extent to which they contribute is greater. People over 55 contribute almost half of all the volunteer hours of people in all age groups. And that number averages about 130 hours per year. That's not a lot. I mean, if you divide that by 52 weeks, that's a couple of hours a week. And I want to come back to that in a moment. 65% of people say that retirement is the best time to give back. But notice the discrepancy between that number and the 25 to 30% of people who actually do so in a formal way. So I submit that there's an opportunity gap here. There's a chance for us to mobilize talent, and we'll talk about that a little bit more in a second, to a much greater extent than we've been able to do so far. So think about that gap, but also think about the 2 hours per week that the 130 hours averages out to. There's room for a lot more activity, and we'll talk about why that would be a good thing if we could make that happen. One good thing is that if people are looking for jobs, and more people in this category are looking for jobs in their retirement years, people have 27% higher odds of finding a job if they volunteer than they do if they don't. And there are lots of reasons for that, and I'm not going to take the time to go into that, but if you want to know more, we can talk about that later. Next slide. People at this age group obviously have a lot to offer, and I just came off of another Zoom conference call this morning where somebody suggested that people at this age category should take credit for what they've learned and what they've developed in the way of skills and experience by sort of awarding themselves a lifetime achievement award for what they've accomplished. And I think that's a really nice sentiment. People come into this time of life having gained a lot of experience, having gained, not just hard skills like, things to do with technology and accounting and all of the other things that we tend to think of as hard skills, but also people at this, studies have shown, people at this age group are have much better judgment, they're much better problem solvers, they're much better communicators, they have better empathy. All of the things that are described here are strengths, they're assets that we can call into the equation. Next step, next slide. There was some research done maybe half a dozen or so years ago now by a group in California that was looking at this challenge of engaging volunteers. This was done by Deloitte and a group called TCC for the National Points of Light organization. And here's what the research showed. The research showed that organizations that integrate volunteers in every aspect of their work, not just a few things on the fringe, operate just as well as other organizations that pay their staff, but they operate at half the median budget, and they're significantly more resilient, sustainable, and scalable. Next slide. I think this is an opportunity for us to think about how we can close gaps, how we can engage people in new ways, and how we can improve the performance of the work that we do by engaging volunteers more broadly. So let's turn now to how we think about designing roles. And I've got several different angles I want to sort of come at this from. The first is about this concept of readiness. Sometimes we tend to think of volunteers as one size fits all and opportunities as what we need, but not necessarily who's ready to fill it. And in order to sort of highlight this question, we've created this kind of 4-stage idea about readiness. So here's the way these terms apply. And we can think about how they apply to the various kinds of roles that Ruth mentioned in her presentation. Curious people are the ones who are just sort of getting started. They want to know more about us. They want information. Basically, they're at a point where they're not ready to jump in, but they might take on, a small task. They might show up for, a fair or something where they man a table, or they, maybe prepare, some paperwork or something, back in the envelope stuffing days. They might be up for that. Basically, what they want to do is to learn. They want to learn more about the organization to see if this is something that might be a good fit for them. The casual volunteer is the one that will show up for sort of episodic things, might take on a small project, but it's not going to be an ongoing kind of commitment. That's for the next category. So somebody who's going to show up every week or every other day, or whatever the nature of the commitment is, or who's going to take on responsibility for something that requires maybe not a schedule, but a level of application of their skills into a more substantive kind of role, would fit into this committed category. And then your champions are the people who basically will do anything for you, because they're so into the mission, and they've got the experience with the organization, that they will become your advocates, they'll become your recruiters, they'll bring their friends in, they'll take on odd jobs, they will come up with ideas. These are the people who really sort of are the super volunteers. So what I would encourage each of us to do is to think about what kinds of roles fit into each of these categories, because ideally you want to have ways for people to engage at every level, because the curious people need to clear that hurdle before they can come to the point where they become casual. And the casual people, that's the pool you draw from to get into the committed stage and so on. People who are committed and who spend a lot of time in the center are the ones typically who will graduate to the champion level. So you want to think about a kind of a ladder of engagement. How do you bring people along through this sequence? Next slide. Next slide, please. Okay, here's another view on designing roles. What motivates people? How can you tap into what people think and care about? And this is drawn from some research that I can provide a citation for if anyone would like it. This research showed, and by the way, there's a lot of research out there. This is consistent with what other studies show. People, by and large, mainly volunteer at this life stage because they want to make a difference for other people. They're other motivated. In other words, they're not doing it for themselves. They're doing it because they want to be helpful to other people. For a subset of that, they're people who are primarily focused on a purposeful life. They want to do something that makes them feel useful, that uses their skills in a purposeful way. Some people want to stay active. They do it primarily because they want to get out of the house. They want to do something that's not home-based, or in this day and age, it's maybe a little bit different. But their motivation is different from those that are other motivated. Some do it because they want to make friends. They want to make connections with people who are like-minded. And for others, there's a kind of a spiritual or moral overlay. They think it's the right thing to do, and because of that, they want to be engaged. So here's the question, knowing that there are these different ways that people bring, these different attitudes that people bring to a desire to volunteer, how do we connect our thinking about roles, about how we reach people to these motivations? And in particular, I think this is applicable as we look at enlarging the pool, not necessarily extending new roles to people who are already ready. Next slide. Okay, another perspective. This is a way to think about the different kinds, another way to think about the different kinds of roles that may be possible to design or fill. One is short-term projects or one-time projects that we have talked a little bit about before. The hands-on service role, I heard about drivers, about food delivery, about food preparation. I heard about some other roles along those lines. Service roles. Then there are the specialized skills. I heard about the tax prep. That requires some training or people who bring experience that they can adapt for this purpose. Shine counselors is another, and so on. Then there are ongoing support roles, and I would put into this, roles like receptionist and office staff and the kinds of functions that are sort of behind the scenes, but they still need to be done. And without those, the centers just don't operate. And in internships, I threw in as a way to create another perspective, because there are specialized arrangements that we can make with students or with others who want to have some experience that they can use to build a resume, to sort of test their interest in this space, and then perhaps move on or would be candidates for staff or other roles. Next slide. And then finally, there's the question of what you need, right? All of this is nice to talk about, but if it doesn't connect with what you need in the way of skills and in the way of functions, in the way of schedules and so on, fit with the organization, it doesn't really matter. So that's, that probably is the starting point, and then you think about these other things as well. Next slide. So let's bring it all together, because now we've got perspectives that we can use to put into the design of a role. So there's the question of needs, which we talked about a moment ago. Who's ready? Why? Why do people want to do this? Let's tap into motivation. What kind of contribution do people want to make? That's the how. And then when we put all of that together, we've got a series of roles that we've designed that meet people where they are, that connect that to where we are. And then the question is, how do we make the match? How do we move forward in terms of finding these people to fill these roles? Next slide. So now we switch gears to recruiting. And one of the parts of recruiting is, once you've designed the role, is how do you find people? So there's the question of where and the question of how you connect to them, what the messages are. And obviously, you start with the things that we talked about in terms of readiness and motivation, because you can design your appeal to focus on people who are other motivated, or people who want to make friends, or people who want to stay active, whatever the motivation is. You can design your recruiting messages to talk to those people specifically about what, and you can, by the way, you can use language in your messaging that is designed to appeal to more than one of those categories. So, think about what keywords would resonate with people who are in those categories. Obviously, keep it simple and upbeat. You want people to think of this as fun and interesting and rewarding. Don't hesitate, and I would recommend using stories, starting with stories. People relate to other people's experience. And if it's sort of just a dry description of what the role involves, it's going to land with a thud for most people. But if there's a story of somebody's experience, a short story, obviously, of somebody else's experience or something that people can relate to, that's going to make a big difference in terms of building a connection. It's important to use images of people who look like who you want to recruit. And here I think we get to two things. One is the connection that people want to feel to the work, to the organization, to the activity. So it's not just enough to show a face. You need to show what people are going to be doing. so that they can relate in some way. And that has to do with diversity. It has to do with, and by the way, I use diversity in a very multidimensional way here. It could be intergenerational, it could be multiracial, it could be different kinds of settings and so on. And then the final thing that I would say is be careful about language. Many of us on the inside tend to use language that we understand, but it's not language that is necessarily accessible to or even friendly to people in the community. And I'll use one quick example. There's a lot of research that's been done on the perceptions that people have about aging, and some of the ways in which people interpret the language, in particular coded language, that we don't often think about, but that other people do. And for example, we tend to use senior pretty, we use it pretty frequently to talk about people in this age group. But the research shows that people associate the term senior with people who are 85 and older. So if you want to recruit somebody who is 65 or 55, that's not a term that you want to use. In fact, it's a term that will turn those people away rather than engage them. So think about what people tend to think of as a descriptor for people in the 55 to 65 age group as older adult. Not even older people, older adult. And if you can avoid it altogether, do so. We talk about, in the work that we do, we talk about people over 50. And we try to avoid that as much as possible. Where we have to designate, we say just people over 50. And that avoids any judgment that people might feel about the way that we're describing ourselves, or even more to the point, appearing to describe them. Next slide. Okay, in terms of outreach strategy, I'll touch on this just very briefly. You want to think about how your role connects to the people that you're trying to reach. So it might be people who are close by. It might be people who are in specific groups. It might be people who have specific skills, and so on. So you need to find connections between those targets and the way that you make those connections. And I'm going to move on because we're short of time, and I don't want to take up, next slide. I don't want to take up time that we can use for questions. Okay, this is back to what Ruth was talking about. How can we build collaborations in the community? And Ruth talked about a lot of these, so I'm not going to add much more. I just want to say the 50+ networking groups, which are also in many of the COAs around the state, I think there's 16 or 17 now in place, is another opportunity to make a connection. We talked about the 27% number of people who are looking for a job. Do so with higher odds because they're volunteering. Next slide. Okay, this is, I think, really important because if you want to keep people once you've brought them on board, you really need to make certain that they feel that they are connected to the team. They need to feel like their contribution counts. And they're not just a volunteer, they're part of the staff. We have paid staff and we have unpaid staff, but they're all part of the staff and they all need to feel a common connection. There are lots of ways that we can do that. We need to build trust. We need to be vulnerable. We need to say to people, this is a job that we need you to do. Without you doing it, we couldn't survive. We can't do this without you. We need your help. And that creates not just a communication challenge, but also a vulnerability challenge. You need to be open to build that kind of trusting relationship. And then there's a purpose component. And this operates at 3 levels. It's the purpose of the organization, what we all do together as an organization makes a difference. And these are the specific ways in which they make a difference. What you do in the organization is something that counts. And we need to make clear the connection between what that role is and what the organization does. And then what we do as a team or as a group within the organization that works together is important as well. Next slide. This is taken from, again, some research that has been done. People who are the ones that tend to stay for long periods of time in organizations do so because they feel better. They're healthier. And in fact, the research shows that even people who are in bad health tend not to just maintain their health, they tend to feel better. Their health improves through volunteer activity. So we want to be able to promote that. We want to be able to say to people, you're going to feel better in the course of your work. And we need to feed that back to people and to test whether in fact that's the case. People who are the stayers are those that feel most connected to the mission. They feel more productive. The same thing is true. If we test that through periodic conversations or surveys, and then say to people, here's what we're seeing. You're feeling more productive as a result of your engagement here. That builds a connection. That builds a relationship that has staying power. And the final thought I'll leave you with is that people who volunteer tend to have friends that also volunteer. People who have spouses, people who volunteer tend to have spouses who also volunteer. In fact, there's some very interesting research that shows that people who are committed volunteers, if they remarry someone who is not a volunteer, their volunteering tends to fall off. Conversely, if someone remarries someone who's a committed volunteer, they tend to come along for the ride and they tend to volunteer as well. So who you hang out with is pretty important in terms of whether or not you volunteer and the extent to which you do. And that's something that I think pertains to as much to recruitment as it does to retention. And the last slide. I'm not going to say much more about this because I think it's pretty evident, and I'm guessing you all probably do this routinely. But obviously, recognition is an important component. Next slide. And there is this guide that I helped to write called 10 Steps for Engaging Adults 50 Plus. Pay no attention to that last phrase, a guide for youth serving organizations. That's only there because a foundation for which this work was done was interested in youth serving organizations, so we felt we needed to put there. But I think you will find that the contents of this little booklet, little ebook, both is helpful, but also it adds detail to some of what I've talked about this afternoon. And you can find that on the Encore Boston Network website under Community, and then hit the Encore Makers tab, and you'll see it there as a resource. Thank you, Susan.
Doug, thank you very much. And just to remind everyone that along with the recording of today's event, as well as any documents presented, are going to be emailed to you. So what I'd like to do now is to introduce our third and final guest speaker. I actually had the privilege of working with Bill. So Bill is one of you. He is, except he's retired, so he was a volunteer coordinator at the Arlington Council on Aging, comes with many years of experience, and I think in fairness to give Bill the microphone. So Bill Murphy, I want to say welcome. It's great to see you, and we've got to get you off mute. So I don't know whether Lynn can do that. Can you get yourself off of mute? Bill? Can someone get Bill?
I think I'm off mute now. I'm off
There,
mute. Am I?
there you are. Well, welcome, Bill. And
Okay.
the floor is all yours. You have 50 people in this room, Bill.
Okay, watch out. Well, thank you very much, Susan, for welcoming me back into working with the councils on aging. I retired about 3 years ago. But I think the one of the concepts that's I wanted to communicate because it was so important to me is the role of a coffee and conversation meeting. I think it brings together a lot of the things that Ruth and Doug were talking about, both as far as something that appeals and can bring people in for recruitment, et cetera, et cetera. So I just try to identify a couple of things that I found why it was so important to me. One of the words that always comes to mind when I think of creating a meeting, a coffee and conversation meeting, is a seed bed. You're really creating a seed bed. You're not exactly sure whether you're going to get weeds or flowers, but most of the time you get great weeds and greater flowers. So it's a little bit kind of uncontrolled. Can people hear me? People hear me? Because I'm not
Yes.
seeing video. I
Yes.
wasn't seeing myself.
Yes, people can, they're nodding their heads. Yep.
Okay, very good. Okay, so you're going to create a seed bed that you're going to see how it blossoms, and you have, like anything else, you have control over it, as Doug is mentioning, by different things that you do, the clarity of the purpose and stuff like that. But I think for me, the purpose was the key. When I got to the Council on Aging, we had a number of excellent volunteers, but they were all individuals. They were all doing it for whatever reason they thought, and I didn't know what they were doing it for or anything else. See? So if you establish a regularly held coffee and what I created was a coffee and conversation meeting. And my purpose was really, had a couple of aspects. One was, as somebody else mentioned, maybe it was Ruth, it creates it offers you an opportunity, a forum, where you can on a regular basis kind of clarify the identity or the purpose for which you are getting together and working together and doing all the things. And it's an ongoing identity that can evolve. Like I say, when I got to Arlington, there were volunteers. There were about 30 volunteers when I got there. But they were all individuals, and they didn't feel a sense of working with and for the Council on Aging. They were just volunteers. And so I set out to kind of create something that would give them a sense of purpose. The second thing I really had in mind was, I think you find it's easy to see ourselves as, oh, I'm just a volunteer, with the emphasis on just, okay? And so I wanted to give them a sense of empowerment and excitement and creativity, that they were the volunteers, and I was going to facilitate them doing their thing, whatever that be. And when we worked together to identify, what needed to be done in the town and all that kind of stuff, but they brought the information to me. For the most part, I didn't know what was going on. But you're getting them together all the time on a regular basis, getting them talking, getting them really feeling like their both work, thoughts, ideas are important and can be the basis of an evolving program. Okay, so that kind of empowerment of the individuals to find their own voices. The other thing was, I tried to accentuate participation in the meeting itself, trying to draw them in different ways, and participation obviously outside and in creating new programs and stuff like that. Okay, so that was another thing. And then I guess the last thing was, like, I didn't try to make it like the reason we called it a coffee and conversation was it was going to be a space, a forum that happened regularly, so they could always count on it. We never canceled the meeting, even if there was only 2 people. They knew that it was going to be there, and they could come and and it fluctuated. Sometimes it'd be 35, sometimes it'd be 14, sometimes it'd be 8. But everybody knew that they were welcome and that there was going to be, something that they could talk about. I guess the other facet that I found that I didn't realize the importance of, but I discovered the importance of, was kind of a set format to the meeting. Okay, I found it. Now this is, like I say, it's important to keep in mind that this is my purpose and my personality. Okay, so in some ways there are kind of like theoretical stuff that's really important, but it's also really has to be a meeting that reflects you as the kind of coordinator, but also them as the people. So again, that's that control and participation. But anyway, so I found it very helpful to create like a little format that the agenda always followed. Okay, and I always had the meeting once a month on the last Monday of the month. Again, the day is not important. The importance is that it's always the same day, same time and the same day. And then if I had other things to do with the volunteers, I would do them on different days. I wouldn't do them on the same day. I wouldn't mix the meeting with the coffee and conversation with coffee and conversation. And then there'd be training meetings or whatever, anything else happened. So just to kind of give you a little clue as to what the agenda looked like. And it does, it's really, it's very much me, but it's very much accomplished what I wanted to do. So we always started off with introduction of new volunteers. They'd tell a little bit about their stories and stuff like that. And so we'd welcome any guests, anything else. Then there'd be a quote of the month. This is the thing that I always loved. The quote of the month, the idea was, if you give a quote, you can ask, well, what does it mean to you? It doesn't mean anything to anybody, but it means something to everybody. And some people will have things to say about it and some won't, but that doesn't matter. It's a thing that can get people talking. And it's also at the beginning of the meeting, so it starts off with a little bit of fun. And so like this one quote I had, when was this? This was in February of 2015, a few years ago. Okay, the quote of the month: follow your dreams, they know the way. And it was a quote from Kobe Yamada. Now what I would do is I would get them to contribute quotes too. But I wasn't very successful on that. They kind of held back. I got a few. I would get a few over in a at a time, but it wasn't great. So I had to come up with the quotes. But again, the point was to get them talking. And then there was just a kind of a whole series of things on the agenda. The first thing on the agenda was always share experiences, reflections, concerns. Please share at least one memorable moment you had as a volunteer this past month and what it meant to you. So again, now you didn't always get everybody talking, and I made it available to everybody, but maybe you'd get 4 or 5. But it was a great thing because one, it took them seriously, a concern, experience, a reflection that had happened. It got them thinking, in the present and stuff like that. And when they're expecting that question all the time, then they can come with things that they know it's going to be an opening for them, and then the rest of the meeting. So that would really, usually that would be most of the meeting, unless there was something big that I had to. At the beginning, it was very hard to get people to talk about those kind of things, because they weren't, you don't tend necessarily to think about it. And then the rest of it, there were if there were reports that were given, or if there was, information to be given, there'd be things like that. A report on the timesheets, a report on whatever. And dates and upcoming events, volunteer appreciation luncheon, annual running with friends, the 5K race, And then in the other event, so that was kind of the event sort of thing, or the information. And then I'd usually get somebody to give a report on what the board had talked about, the board of the Council on Aging. And again, that was a way of linking them to, something else, to the bigger picture. And then there were other agenda, whatever anybody else wanted to introduce. And then we got into this thing. I had a guy that was a volunteer who was like he was like Picasso. He was 90 years old, and he couldn't grind out enough things, dishes, badges, all kinds of stuff. Wonderful, wonderful guy, Bob Brown. So we created a little segment in the agenda called Bob's Bonanza Drawing. And he'd bring in different things each month, and, we'd give them away. We'd just give them away. People would pick choices. And then I guess the final thing was just, of course, there always had to be coffee and food, some kind of little food that somebody would donate, because again, I didn't want it to be too much like a meeting as a conversation and coffee and conversation. So that's, and I must say, over the years, it really was it was a great thing. It was a great dialogic kind of thing. The staff had access to this group on a regular basis if they needed to do anything with them. I had access to them in terms of finding out what was going on in town, what was going on in the programs. Because after a while, once you build up the trust, as Doug was talking about, they'll tell you anything, So, you'd really find out what was going on. Sometimes you didn't want to know. But anyway, but it was very, very good. And I don't know what I never calculated the retention percentage, but there were very few. Usually the only way you left was by dying. So people really stayed and fed into one another's friendship and all that kind of stuff. So I was very happy that I had the opportunity to work in this fashion with the volunteers, and I learned a tremendous amount about individuals, and it was meaningful for me. I always look forward to going to the meeting. I knew I was gonna get some real good feedback somehow. One of the high points, aside from meeting with Susan for the month. Anyway, so thank you, and I hope if I have any questions, I'll be happy to. The thing I just encourage you really is just think about yourself and what you're trying to do with them, and then find a way to do that. That the coffee and conversation was the way for me, but and it came very much out of my experience, my life experience, and the way, in general, that I kind of do things. So thank you.
Well, Bill, thank you very much. And actually, thank you to Ruth, Doug, and Bill. And so now what we'd like to have you do, if you've got questions, if you could type it up in the chat box, and then Kelly will take a look and she will direct the question.
Okay. Susan, we have a few questions to start off. The first one came in during Ruth's presentation. So Ruth, you might want to take this one. The question is about precautions for medical rides. Do you have something set up already with protocols?
Yeah, we do. We just developed them. We immediately developed some so that we could continue driving elders to their essential appointments, which amounted to about 3 per week. And we have some of these champion volunteers who are both Meals on Wheels drivers, or they deliver Meals on Wheels and they drive people to their medical appointments and so on. So they were versed in delivering Meals on Wheels safely and driving an elder to their medical appointments. So we've had more medical appointments opening up, as you know, because things are becoming more essential. You can't put off your foot appointment, your certain appointments for too long. So as that's been happening, we've been asking volunteers, are you ready to come back? About half are, and some of them are in the older group, and we're not encouraging it. We're just saying, if you're ready, we don't want to say no to you. We definitely would, we welcome you back, but we don't want to put any pressure on anyone. But we have a document that I'm happy to share if anyone individually wants to maybe ask Susan, then I can send that along, or you can contact me directly. I'll have my information on the document that I send to Susan. But it's a, protocols that we're following based on CDC guidelines and their, ASAP guidelines, and I think it would be helpful. And I was reading about this, on the MCOA website about all the sort of protocols that you'll have to go through if you have vehicles, but ours are volunteers driving their own cars. So, and
Yeah. Thank
very
you.
successful so far.
Thank you, Ruth. I know as you were talking, another question came in about that document. I know that Susan has already told people that she would email it out to everyone. We also will be putting this presentation, since it's recording, on our MCOA website by the end of the week. And also we could put the PowerPoint presentations on the website as well. So just a couple ways that you'll have access to all of the great information we had today. The second question, I think I'll direct it to Doug. Yeah, okay. Oh, did we mute and unmute at the same time, Doug? The question is, somebody discusses this question a lot of times in their office, and they wanted some input about neutral friendly terms to use instead of senior. And I know that got brought up in your presentation, so would you take that one?
Yes, and I can send again some information to Susan that she can relay about this research. And you can find it yourself. The Frameworks Institute is the one that's done this research. It's funded by the American Society on Aging, AARP, and a whole bunch of NCOA, a lot of aging organizations across the country. And it's been going on for about 3 or 4 years now. And they've come up with a communications toolkit that you can find online, and I can send a reference to Susan. And it talks about language and terms, and the terms that people associate most negatively with aging are senior, elder, and elderly. And the terms that people associate most positively with older adults is older people, older adults, the ones that seem less judgmental. And as I mentioned when I was in my presentation, we try to avoid that language whenever possible altogether, because even though people don't want to be called old, don't mind being referred to as older, because it has less of a connotation of being sort of stigmatized and set aside by society. We all know what the ageist stereotypes are and how they play, unfortunately, in the thinking of many people. So that's what we want to avoid. It's not that we're trying to be, the language police. We're just trying to maintain a sense of neutrality in our language so that we don't unintentionally alienate or offend or in any way, distinguish people in a way that they feel is negative. Just a very quick aside, and that is that most of us, when we're asked, and there's interesting research on this too, asked what old means, they tend to think about people that are 20 years older than they are at the time that the question is being answered. So if you ask a 30-year-old, what old is, they wouldn't even think of anybody on this call as being, it's that 20-year, 15 to 20-year horizon. When you ask someone my age, I'll be 74 this year, how old is. You know, it's a lot different than it was when I was 30. So it's you know, it's a moving target.
Okay. Well, thank you very much, Doug. The next is a comment really for Bill. So I'll unmute you, Bill, if you want to make a comment on it as well. And the comment is that the conversation style that you've been using is very familiar to this participant at this meeting. And so she is trying to implement it right now at her senior center. So it is just an agreement with you that it's a great idea.
Great. Okay, go for it.
And actually, if I may add, so you called it coffee and conversation by day. Bill, what did you call it at night?
Oh, well, you help me. You tell me.
What, something in mocktails?
Yeah, yeah. Mocktails, conversation and mocktail.
Mocktails, yeah, yeah. Because and also just trying to capture the volunteers that were just available in the evening, so everyone was still feeling connected.
I don't have any other questions.
Well, if there are no further questions, I just once again want to, and actually if the speakers have one last thing that, you know, if they felt like they forgot to say something, this would be your time. We certainly have enjoyed your presentations, Ruth, learning more about RSVP, knowing that it's in other places in the state, although the structure might be a little bit different. Is that correct?
Yes, yeah,
Yep.
definitely. You know, I definitely talk to other programs all the time. You know, we have our own association in Massachusetts, so I reached out to the other Massachusetts programs because, you know, I wanted to hear what are their great partnerships with COAs, but I just really didn't have time. You know, Doug and I, and we could all talk together for a long time. But there's just a lot of great ways that people can collaborate and work together and engage. I love the idea of the coffee and conversations, and we're doing all these things kind of at the same time, and I think people really do appreciate that time spent appreciating and recognizing volunteers' value.
Right, and I would also say, I think along with Doug's presentation, it's giving us an opportunity to think a little bit differently. So, I mean, we all know that we have volunteers that come in, you know, you've got, maybe you have the newsletter volunteers, maybe you have the reception volunteers. Well, maybe, you know, given the pandemic and the frantic search sometimes for volunteers, but also the frantic, how do you manage the influx of all those volunteers? Because they came out of the woodwork, which was wonderful. But maybe we train volunteers to manage some volunteers. Maybe you can take a volunteer to create a safety net for a food coalition in your community to, you know, to try to, you know, address the gaps that we all felt when those doors closed. You know, it's really just getting us to think in terms of, yes, we have relationship because we have the volunteer appreciation lunches or other events. And there've been a lot of creativity that's gone on throughout the network during this time to host those volunteer appreciation moments. But really to build on the relationship. And I think, Doug, and you might want to step in here, but you said in terms of extending the capacity of the organization and how, I'll let you fill in those words because I've got it in my mind, but I just.
Sure. Yeah, in fact, one of the things that I find in talking with volunteer managers, not just in COAs, but in nonprofits generally, is that a lot of them say, I just don't have the time. You know, I understand that I should be doing things differently, that there are opportunities beyond those that I can fill, but I just don't have the capacity. And, you know, that's not unique. If that's your perspective, that's not unique. But what I often suggest to people who make that comment is that maybe your first volunteer recruit should be somebody to help you design roles, somebody to help you with recruiting, somebody to help you with some of the things that Bill talked about, managing a coffee and conversation to build that sense of belonging and connection to the organization. So, you can help yourself by recruiting a volunteer to do work that you can't do, but that would be good for the organization. And in particular, I think cities and towns are facing budget cuts. I can't see any way around it. And I know that, senior centers and councils on aging are challenged from a budget perspective in the best of times. This is a potential solution to meet those very urgent needs, because the population is growing in this over 55 category. And unless we can find ways to provide the support and the programs and the services that people in our community need, there are people who are going to be unserved, and that would be not a situation any of us would want to see. So the way to close the gap is probably by bringing more people on in roles that might otherwise have been staff roles, but now can be filled by people who bring their lifetime of skills and experience to bear on the challenges that we face and the needs that we want to meet.
Excellent, thank you. And then certainly
Yeah.
oh, go ahead, Bill.
Yeah, I just want to really support what Doug had just said in two ways. One, when I got hired, we came up with the title Supervisor of Volunteers instead of Volunteer Coordinator. And it was interesting. It was very interesting because every time I talked with people, and they said that they would always raise the question, a volunteer coordinator, are you a volunteer or do you get paid? And I said, no, I get paid. So I was a supervisor of volunteers, as in contrast to volunteer coordinator. So any of you who are being paid, you might want to consider changing the title, just because I think because what it adds, what it introduced into even in my own mind, exactly what Doug was saying. I saw my role as not just coordinating the volunteers. I was bigging up people to do things in the sense of that I couldn't do, that I didn't have time to do. So I had different people. When I found out, like, I really liked what he said about, trying to get to know the interests of your volunteers. Because when you get somebody tied into, if their interest ties into something that you need in the council, boy, they can go with that. And all you got to do is just, encourage them and give them advice or give them anything, meet with them once in a while. And you just turn it over to them and supervise it in the best sense of supervision, And I just, as an example of that, Doug had mentioned, I think, or maybe Ruth did, somebody, the idea of intergenerational. I cannot emphasize the greatness of intergenerational activities. One of the most successful that we had was a book club at the high school. We had a book club started with one of the teachers at the high school and myself. And then ultimately turned it over to some other people. But it's been going for 15 years. There's 8 or 9 students all the time, 5 or 6 adults. They meet once a month. They read a different book. The kids and the adults pick the books. And it's just absolutely made the stereotypes that the kids have of us and we have of the kids tinkle tinkle in the air,
Mhm.
And it's just been great. The kids are just we found so much. It's just been great for everybody, and it's a real good thing. So and the more intergenerational things, I think, if volunteers are interested in working on it, that's the thing, and it's not easy, but it is good, So anyway, those two things, I think, try to utilize the volunteer interests to do things which are much broader and much that staff doesn't have time to do, but you want to do it. And then the intergenerational stuff. Those are the two things I think that I really loved about working at the Council on Aging in Arlington. So thanks.
Well, thank you for that, Bill. And then my last comment really with regards to the coffee and conversation piece. I think the one thing, and I think, Bill, you touched on it, but what is really amazing, so we've all had volunteers, and depending on the size of your building or the kinds of things that you have them do, so oftentimes that the volunteers aren't interfacing with one another. So they really have no idea other than they know that there's volunteers. So the coffee and conversation concept, and then when Bill was talking about on his agenda, how they were sharing the experience, it really brings the total organization together for that volunteer. And, when there's that passion, that sense of ownership, I mean, that's good for the psyche, but that's also good for the organization. So that was just one thing that I had come to realize by, watching Bill do these things. It's just been a tremendous program. And actually, Bill was a presenter at MCOA conference. I forget what year, Bill, but he presented, I think it was called Volunteering in the Dark, which was the use of volunteers, but you also talked about coffee and conversation. So if there aren't any questions, any additional questions, I just really want to say I am so grateful for all that you do as volunteer coordinators, certainly from our presenters today sharing their insights, their connections with the world that we work in. I'm glad we all had a chance to get together. You got to see one another. I know that MCOA tries to host a volunteer meeting twice a year and everything went upside down with the pandemic. So going virtually gives us an opportunity to get together a little bit more easily, although I know we can't see one another. And I just want to thank you. Keep up doing the great work. The volunteers and your communities are just reaping the benefits of your passion and hard work. So I want to say thank you. Have a great afternoon. MCOA is, as Kelly said, we're going to be posting this on the website. I know that there were a few people that had registered. We actually ended up with 51 in the room with 59 being registered. So that tells you that you are all very interested in, if nothing else, seeing one another. I mean, I'm looking at these faces. They keep shifting on the screen. So I want to thank you. Have a great rest of your week. And keep looking at the MCOA briefs because we're going to continue to put information out. As far as the transportation that Ruth is going to send me, I guess, the document. MCOA, we are working on the task force for reopening. We've got some graduate students in public health that are assisting us creating infographics for you, which will not only help you, just on the visual side, but we're also producing guidance that I believe some of it's already been posted on the website for reopening considerations. So I wish you well. Feel free to email me at susanc@mcoaonline.com if you have any questions or comments with regards to this or any other needs that you see yourself needing. There are 7 volunteer coordinators that are working with me right now so that we can update our 10-year-old volunteer coordinator guidebook. So you can be expecting that probably within the next month to be posted on the website. So once again, thank you very much. Ruth, thank you. I don't know where you are on my screen. I've lost you. Oh, there you are. Doug, thank you. And Bill, and thank you so much, Bill. We appreciate you coming in from retirement to participate in this event today. So thank you. I wish you all well.
Thank you.
Bye, everybody.
Yep.
Okay. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.